حرص القيادة السورية على أرواح مواطنينا وأمن بلدنا.
Assad does not have significant military capability.
إذا قتلونا معتادين نروح بيتنا.
Good afternoon and thank you for joining us on FutureTV. I'm Linda Tamim and these are today's top stories. President Michel Sleiman leaves Beirut for New York to take part in the UN General Assembly meeting on September 25th. Russia is accusing the United States of trying to blackmail it into a tough UN resolution on Syria's chemical weapons as a mortar round hits Moscow's embassy in Damascus. And the death toll in the Kenyan capital of Nairobi rises to 59 people and 175 wounded as security forces are locked in a standoff with gunmen. Interior Minister Marwan Sharbil says Hezbollah's new checkpoints and self-security procedures in Beirut's southern suburbs should end after the deployment of the state security forces in the area. The checkpoints that have caused traffic south of the city were erected after a string of attacks targeting Beirut's pro-Hezbollah areas. Lebanese authorities said on Friday they will dispatch government forces to Beirut's Hezbollah-controlled suburbs next week to carry out security checks. They will replace the party's checkpoints, which have drawn criticism from some parties as Hezbollah members have detained people for questioning. Sharbil says there should be no longer self-security in the country and explained that Hezbollah members had restored to their own security measures when the state was unable to provide such security. Justice Minister Shakib Qardbawi says the March 14 coalition is demanding for a non-political cabinet aiming at pushing Hezbollah and the Free Patriotic Movement out of power. The country lacks a sitting government and the new cabinet formation process had been stalled for almost 6 months due to conditions set by Lebanon's political rivals. Qardbawi reiterates his call for an all-inclusive political cabinet in which each political party is represented in respect to its popular base. He added that national dialogue between political rivals is the only exit from the country's political stalemate. MP Ali Fayyad, a member of Loyalty to the Resistance parliamentary bloc, says a government based on a 888 formula is unrealistic and cannot be implemented. Fayyad addressed all parties during the inauguration of a sports stadium in Dalafe town, calling upon them to take into account the turmoil the Arab region is going through. He finally urged political factions to go back to dialogue, away from any foreign wagers which target the resistance and internal stability. President Michel Sleiman has left Beirut for New York today to take part in the UN General Assembly meeting on September 25th, where he will deliver a speech and discuss Syrian refugee challenges. Reports say Sleiman will meet at the sidelines of the conference with U.S. President Barack Obama, Iranian President Hassan Rouhani, Jordanian King Abdullah II, Qatari Emir Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, and other officials. Sleiman is accompanied by his wife Wafa, Deputy Prime Minister Samir Muqbil, Foreign Minister Adnan Mansour, Social Affairs Minister Wael Abu Faoud, and a delegation of media and security figures. The participants are also expected to voice their support for stability in the country and call for distancing it from the Syrian conflict. Turkey's President Abdullah Gül says his country will not tolerate al-Qaeda-type groups emerging in the Syrian conflict following fighting between rebels and jihadists last week. The president says the threats of radicalism and terrorism emerging from Syria's civil war are Turkey's most important issues. Gül was speaking to reporters en route to New York, where he is due to attend the UN General Assembly. More details in this report.
Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov is accusing the United States of blackmailing Russia to support a tough UN resolution against Syria and says the West is blinded by the idea of regime change in the war-torn country. Russia, which is a staunch ally of the regime of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, providing him with diplomatic backing as well as weapons. It was a key force behind a deal under which Damascus will hand over its chemical weapons stocks for destruction, which headed off a U.S. plan to take military action against the regime. In other news, Iranian President Hassan Rouhani warns the West that it will regret any military intervention in Syria and is calling for dialogue to stop the war in its ally. Rouhani made the comments on the eve of his departure for New York to attend the United Nations General Assembly, where the tragedy of Syria's deadly 30-month conflict is to take center stage. The Iranian president is due to discuss the conflict with French counterpart François Hollande on the sidelines of the annual meeting and could possibly meet U.S. President Barack Obama. Meanwhile, on the ground in Syria, a mortar round hit the compound of the Russian embassy in the Syrian capital Damascus, according to a source at the embassy. The attack was also reported by the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, which said it was the first time the compound had been hit. It confirmed that there were no injuries in the attack, which struck inside the compound, but did not appear to hit the embassy's main building. Rebel forces arrayed in parts of the outskirts of the capital regularly fire rockets and mortar rounds into Damascus, including the area around the embassy in the center of the city.
Next, Chinese court sentences former leading politician Bo Xilai to life in prison. That and more after the break. Welcome back. Officials are counting votes after Iraqi Kurdistan's first election in 4 years, with opposition groups hoping to end the decades-old dominance of the two main former rebel parties. The vote itself went off largely without incident on Saturday, with turnout pegged at 73.9%. The sporadic violence hit the main opposition grouping in the run-up to the elections, and one man was reported killed in a shooting after polls closed. The UN praised the smooth conduct of the vote, with preliminary results due in the coming days. The election for the autonomous region's parliament came as 2.5 years of turmoil around the Middle East raised renewed questions about the political future of the Kurds, were spread across a number of neighboring states. President Hassan Rouhani in Iran has demanded that Western governments recognize his country's right to enrich uranium in any nuclear deal ahead of his departure for key talks at the United Nations. Rouhani says a deal to allay Western suspicions was dependent on acceptance of Iran's enrichment program. Rouhani added Iran was ready to cooperate with the West, and he says he believes both could settle all the region's problems. His comments came on the eve of his departure for the UN General Assembly in New York, where he is scheduled to deliver a keynote address and meet French President François Hollande on the sidelines. Rouhani says he wants those talks to resume as quickly as possible, but insists that they do so without precondition. Moving on to Kenya, security forces are locked in a standoff with gunmen who killed at least 59 people at an upmarket shopping mall in the Kenyan capital, and it is still unclear how many hostages the al-Qaeda-linked militants are holding. The Somali Islamist group Al-Shabaab claimed responsibility for yesterday's assault on Nairobi's Westgate Mall, which is frequented by Westerners as well as Kenyans. Yumna Nafal has the story.
Gunfire can still be heard at the shopping mall in Kenya's capital, Nairobi, where at least 59 people have been killed and several more held hostage by gunmen from a Somali Islamist group that has declared allegiance to Al-Qaeda. Foreigners, including a Canadian diplomat, were killed in Saturday's attack at Westgate Mall, claimed by the Islamist group Al-Shabaab. One man told reporters that he had had a close encounter with gunmen as he entered the mall.
Unfortunately, where I was, actually, the security guard who was just lying next to where I was shot in the head. He died instantly. I saw that, actually. Then he shot at me. Unfortunately, the bullet, actually, if you look here, actually, there was a graze. There was a graze here. Lucky. So he shot at my head, but luckily it hit the wall behind me. So that's when I nearly blacked out. But I had like 3 or 4 other shots. So I lay down still just next to the flowers, but I could see the guy next to me was still. That's when, after a bit, some while, that's when now they walked into the mall. I guess some of them went into the basement and the others went to the rooftop.
Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta, facing his first major security challenge since his election in March, said his close family members were among the dead. The assault is the biggest single attack in Kenya since Al-Qaeda's East Africa cell bombed the U.S. Embassy in Nairobi in 1998, killing more than 200 people. In 2002, the same militant cell attacked an Israeli-owned hotel on the coast and tried to shoot down an Israeli jet in a coordinated attack. Al-Shabaab, which is battling Kenyan and other African peacekeepers in Somalia, had repeatedly threatened attacks in Kenya if Nairobi did not pull its troops out of their country. Britain also condemned the callous and cowardly attack and said that it continued its support for counter-terrorism efforts in the region.
Well, there has been the claim of responsibility from Al-Shabaab. That doesn't mean we know for certain who has done or is doing this. I think what we do know for certain, and what we can say in the United Kingdom for certain, is that all of our work and the work of Kenya and other countries neighboring on Somalia to bring stability to Somalia and to defeat terrorism there will continue, and it will never be deterred or prevented by actions of this kind. And I know that will be the view of the Kenyan government and the people of Kenya as well.
Meanwhile, Kenyan security forces said they arrested one of the gunmen behind the attack. This is according to the Kenyan presidency on Twitter. In a separate tweet, the East African country's head of police, David Kimayo, said several other assailants had been pinned down after soldiers and police moved into the mall to hunt down the attackers.
Moving on to Europe, Germans are voting in national elections set to hand Chancellor Angela Merkel a third term, but potentially force her into governing with her main rivals. Polls open at 8 a.m. with nearly 62 million voters called to cast ballots in Europe's top economy. Initial television estimates are expected shortly after booths closed at 4 p.m. After shepherding Europe's top economy through the debt turmoil, Merkel emerged more popular than ever due to her reassurance as the crisis felt leaders in France, Greece, Italy and Spain. Although Merkel will likely continue to be chancellor, this election may force her to seek a new coalition partner. And now for a quick look at other news around the world. 56 people have been killed in a suicide bomb attack on a church in the Pakistani city of Peshawar. The blast occurred as parishioners left the building after attending Sunday Mass. Police say the suicide bomber rushed towards people who were coming out of the building and blew himself up near the gate of the church located in a densely populated area near a market. A Chinese court has sentenced former leading politician Bo Xilai to life in prison after finding him guilty on charges of graft, accepting bribes and abuse of power. The court, which made the announcement today, also ordered that all his personal assets be seized. The former Politburo member and party chief of the megacity Chongqing vigorously had denied any criminal wrongdoings during the trial. A statue of former South African president and anti-apartheid leader Nelson Mandela is unveiled in Washington, D.C. The statue is located outside the South African embassy, the site where thousands of protesters demanded an end to apartheid and Mandela's release from prison during the 1980s. The 3-meter statue by South African sculptor John Doyle depicts the moment Mandela walked out of Victor Verster's prison after being incarcerated for 27 years. President Barack Obama is calling for a renewed push for gun control after mass shootings in Washington and Chicago in the past week. Obama made passing tough gun laws a top priority after a gunman killed 20 children and 6 adults at an elementary school in Newton, Connecticut in December. But Congress has rejected his proposals to restrict sales of certain types of guns and require greater background checks. Gun rights groups oppose the measures, saying they would infringe on Americans' constitutional rights. And still in the United States, George Soros, the 83-year-old billionaire investor, philanthropist and supporter of liberal political issues, has married for a third time, tying the knot with education consultant Tamiko Bolton. Soros and Bolton, 42, exchanged vows in a small ceremony at his Bedford, New York estate, which Soros bought in 2003 from Jurassic Park author Michael Crichton. Federal Judge Kimba Wood officiated at the wedding, which was attended by members of the couple's families, including the groom's 5 children. The exchange of vows was followed by a reception with more than 500 guests at the Carmore Center for Music and the Arts. Among the reception guests were World Bank President Jim Yong Kim and some other foreign leaders. Christine Lagarde, Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund, and Bono of the rock band U2 also attended the reception. And on that note, we end our bulletin for today. Now for a reminder of our headlines. President Michel Sleiman leaves Beirut for New York to take part in the UN General Assembly meeting on September 25th. Russia is accusing the United States of trying to blackmail it into a tough UN resolution on Syria's chemical weapons as a mortar round hits Moscow's embassy in Damascus. And the death toll in the Kenyan capital of Nairobi rises to 59 people and 175 wounded as security forces are locked in a standoff with gunmen. Those are your Sunday headlines from Future Television live in Beirut. Stay tuned for the news bulletin in French with our very own Serge Berberi in just a few minutes.
من حفظ القيادة السورية على أرواح مواطنينا وأمن بلدنا.
Assad does not have significant military capability.
إذا قتلونا مع اليابان